Just wanted to call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock, 7:05. Just wanted to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out on this rainy night. We appreciate it. And I'm going to turn this over to Kevin and John to start the presentation. And we'll go from there. Mr. Wilson.
I'll just start with a good evening and want to thank our guests for joining us this evening and making their way through the tough weather that's out there tonight. Also want to thank our families who may be watching from home, and I know we have a couple of also parents in the back, so we thank you for joining as well. So I have an agenda I'd like to walk everyone through. Tonight is our workshop night tonight, and so we have an opportunity to roll up our sleeves and dig in and ask the questions that we typically may not have time for during a regular board meeting. I will ask, I think it will run smoother if the team and I have an opportunity to go through the slides. For our board members, you've seen a lot of the slides that we initially opened with, so I'll move a little faster through those, and then of course spend more time on the slides that are a little bit more meaningful. So let me just start with superintendent overview. That's me, Kevin Walson again. Good to see everyone. Number 2, school enrollment projections. You'll see in the agenda. And so previously we had opened with talking about enrollment and really talking as an aggregate, talking about district-wide enrollment. And so we wanted to make sure we found an opportunity to break it down K-5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. And ending on 9-12 appropriately so we can then transition to Danbury High School enrollment and staffing. Give the community an opportunity to see the demands on the system from that perspective. Other certified staffing requests, and when we say other, it's staffing outside of the high school. Some of it does impact the high school, some does not, so we want to make sure we address that. And then other expenses. You have heard from John Spang and Mike Seeley previously about some of those other expenses. We will define those as we go through the slides. But it's things like energy and utility increases, and also laptop replacements, and that reality that is in front of us right now. Last but not least, I will then come back and wrap up with COVID relief grants, ESSER 2, and then talk about some next steps, hopefully for us as a school community. So the next slide. And you take care of that for us? We're doing everything now. And so the proposed annual budget, see these three beautiful kids on the front page. And then on the next slide, you'll see our board members. So I want to thank you for your ongoing commitment to serving this school community. And I just want to take a second on our vision and mission. And so about 2-3 years ago, we spent a lot of time developing the vision for this district, the mission for this district. Some of our board members might recall really a lot of time that we spent on providing transformational learning experiences. I just want to say tonight that line, that word, is really resounding with this district right now as we're in the middle of launching what we've been calling the Career Academy. That's really going to change experiences for kids in the school district. And there's another word that oftentimes I include in my emails, and that is this idea of in partnership. In partnership with our families has been a priority for our school district, and in partnership with our community members here in the district. And of course, I want to thank some very key community members who are here this evening. Mayor, thank you, and council members, thank you for joining us. And so on the next slide, thank you, Ken, are 2 things that really serve one thing that's really important for us as a school district, and that's this idea of a portion of the graduate, which frankly serves as the North Star for Danbury Public Schools. How we get there is our strategic plan, and so that kind of serves as the roadmap, if you will, for this journey to continue to get to this North Star, which we call it our portion of the graduate. Next slide, Ken. Program needs. As we reminded in our last meeting, or budget drivers, and it's really a combination of both. We will explain as we go through. Salaries and benefits, you'll see a big number there, $5 million. And I'll just say this quickly, this is really, if we had not one additional staff member, salaries and benefits will increase as a result of fair and competitive contract negotiations for our labor units. Energy, utilities, and I will be providing a brief overview on that one. Energy, utilities, and inflation. John will cover this one for us and think a little bit deeper on what that means and itemizing those areas that lead up to the 1.2. Enrollment increase is 2.6 million. And so I will cover some slides on just kind of walking you through the enrollment increases. Number one, the SLAM projections, that's our demographer. But then projections versus actual, and I'll be walking you through those things. And then following me will be Dr. Casimiro and Kelly Chushis, our two assistant superintendents, then talking about what that means for staffing increases to address the enrollment increases. And we have a special guest tonight, and that is Principal Donovan, who's also going to be talking about what this means for the high school. The ESSER shortfall, John will be talking about that, talking about our expiring grants and what that means for ESSER 2 and the respective staff that's in that grant right now. Technology replacement cycle, the $1 million, Mike, Dr. Seelig has talked about this in committee meetings, but he's going to talk about that again tonight for additional questions. And last but not least, equipment and services, and John and Mike will take this one. And it's a combination of equipment and services that's in both respective portfolios. So the next slide, is just our district profile. I'll go through this quickly. At the time of our submission, we had, when I say submission, 12,210 students on October 1st. So annually, we have to submit to the state how many students we have, and then that kind of serves as our attendance number. Of course, we continue to grow. After that number has been submitted, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's 12,210. And then of those students, we have 48% of our students are identified as economically disadvantaged. 14% identified as students with disabilities, which frankly for a district as needy as ours is a really low number. And then 34% multi-language learner. You've also heard us refer to this group as English learners as well. Next slide. And so an overview of our program increases, savings and efficiencies, and that is a slide later on I'll be talking about, but I just want to talk about these lines in the aggregate. And so salaries and benefits, $5 million. Enrollment increases, and this is staffing to address the enrollment increase, 2.6. Energy increases, 1.2. Technology, 1 million. Equipment and services, 2 million. ESSER 2 shortfall, 2 million. And that means the staffing that's in ESSER 2 with that grant expiring in June 30th. The subtotal is 13.8 million, but savings and efficiency, and we'll talk about the details of that, lands us at a request this year of $9 million, or a 6.4% increase. So fiscal reality, and I've actually highlighted a couple of things to walk you through this slide, and that is enrollment continues to grow beyond our projections, and that's nothing new here in Danbury for us. Those enrollment gains mean increased staffing primarily, and you're going to see in our detailed pages, primarily for our multi-language learners and our special ed students. Pre-K is a number that also needs to be addressed, and so Kelly will be talking about that later. The staffing increases also include the high school, but again, our special guest will be talking about that. Staffing costs have also increased significantly through contract negotiations, and I opened and talked about that initially, and that's that $5 million number. Inflation in the greater economy has impacted us here in Danbury, and last but not least, in an effort to reduce the funding requests, we conducted our own kind of internal reviews, and again, we'll be talking about that to wrap up the meeting. And this is just reiterating the $9 million proposed request, and a 6.4 increase. Salaries and benefits. And so you will see where we were last year at 79.7 for salaries, 29.3 in benefits. I believe we were anticipating an increase in benefits. We did not experience the increase, and so we're really happy about that. But still, just in terms of normal increase in costs. Our benefits are projected to be a $1.3 million difference for the 23-24 school year. Our salaries, the $79.7 million, will mean $83.4 million next year, and that's a gain of $3.7 million, and that's for a total of $5 million. Again, this is reflective of our contract negotiations, step movement for our teachers, et cetera, across the system. And again, just a reminder, we do have over 2,000 employees in the district, and so 4.6 for that many staff members. These are the kind of numbers we're talking about. And so enrollment growth. And the board may recall this slide. I just want to review for the board again and for our visitors tonight and anyone watching. The key actual count, and then that's kind of the yellow-orange. And so I will go from left to right, but first I'll start with the key. The yellow is our number that we submit to the state of Connecticut on October 1st annually. And so you'll see 21-22, 22-23, because that's where we are now. The blue is the projected number from our SLAM report. And so you'll see those three numbers for the next 3 years from SLAM, meaning our demographer report. The red number, in most districts, they don't have to worry about this, but in Danbury we do, because we continue to experience increased enrollment. And we're not upset about that, it's just our reality. We're happy about that, but this is our reality. And so last year in 21-22, the demographer projected 11,843. That was adjusted because by October 1st, we had 12,190 students. We grew, we lost some students, and then by October 1st this year, again, I'm looking at the number above the red, we had 12,210 students. However, you'll see once again that outperformed the SLAM projections of 12,110. And then for the 23-24 school year, 24-25, and so on, you'll see in blue the demographer's projections, 12,189. We've made an adjustment, given we've already outperformed that, and estimated that we would be, and what we did was we essentially just added 100 students every year, 12,289. You'll see 12,288 from the demographer again. We've added 100 to 12,388, etc. Next slide. And so we wanted to provide a little bit more detail, and so the board has not seen this back up, so I just want to make that clear. These are new slides for us, providing backup to those whole numbers. And so this slide is focusing specifically on students with disabilities, and then talking about enrollment growth in that area. And so if you start with 21-22, we had 1,700 students last year, and that number includes pre-K. And so the gray number at the bottom are pre-K students, the blue is K through 12. So we have 1,716. And as of year to date, we have grown about 25 students in full, and that's just K-12. But then in pre-K, and Kelly keeps saying we're growing in pre-K, we've had a growth of 42 students to date with our pre-K schools. So pre-K students. So we've had almost 70 students to date. And those are special ed numbers as of right now. And then you'll see the projections for 24-25 with growing to almost 75 students by 23-24, I'm sorry. So these are the projections for next year. Next slide, Mike. And so here are our multilingual students, or English language learners. And I'll start with 21-22, and you will see the staffing requests really align to the previous slide and this slide here. Because you will see we have an estimated almost 250 students, additional students we've had specifically in this area. And so we had last year 3,736 students. And you will see the growth of almost 1,000 additional students just of English language learners. This requires significant special staffing for the students. And again, you'll see that reflected in our house. Next slide. And again, and this is the last slide on enrollment, and it really just walks us through a breakdown K-5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. You'll see the gradual growth with pre-K, and that those numbers reflected from left to right. K-5, you will notice we are beginning to flatline and even lose a couple of students in K-5. The unfortunate thing is, and AIS is a great example of this, we've had decreased enrollment at AIS as an example, but not enough to reduce teachers, because we have to have at least 22 to 24 students depending on the grade level at every class. We can't have any more than that. And so for years, we've had 3 sections in every grade level at AIS. Similar to other schools at Great Plain, for example, we've typically had 2 sections at every grade level. If we don't have enough, but if the decrease is not significant enough to reduce it down to just 2 teachers per section at AIS, there's really no cost-saving opportunity. So the K-5 numbers, yes, there is a reduction across the system, but not enough across the system or in one building to reduce that in elementary. In 6-8, our middle schools, I would argue, and don't get me wrong, because Principal Donovan and the high school staff also need relief. Middle schools need relief. 6-12 has been a problem in terms of population growth in those respective buildings. The middle school after this year will begin to get some relief. The bubble that we have experienced in the high school is about, well, they're in the bubble now right now. The bubble was at the middle schools. We're at the end of that bubble. We're a little over 1,000 students at Broadview Middle School. Just under 1,000 now for the first time in the last couple of years at Rogers Park. And so you'll see the numbers really flatlining at Rogers Park as a result of this bubble that we're talking about. High school, on the other hand, continues to do different things. We had year-to-date, so we have 3,691 students we understand year-to-date at the high school. This is, and I don't have the number in front of me, so excuse me, but this is an unfunded number, unbudgeted number, because these numbers have grown since last year's October 1 submission. And so between October 1 last year, budget season, by the time we were requesting, Dan Donovan and Danbury High School has received more students. And so that 12,210, and I'm sorry, at the bottom you'll see the 12,210. That number will be growing to about 12,300 next year, at least close to 55 students. But again, we still need to address the gap from last year because it was unbudgeted and unfunded. And we'll have a slide to show all of the what we call overages. And so this means I typically have 5 sections as a teacher, contracted and supposed to teach. I was a social studies teacher, so I would teach 5 classes in social studies. But because we have more kids, but Dan may not have 5 new sections to offer to hire a new teacher, but he may have 3 because of enrollment growth. And so I take a 6th class, Mike takes a 6th class, Kelly takes a 6th class, and those are the overages that are unbudgeted in the system. And again, you'll see kind of a roster of those overages that we're talking about. Then the next page, and this is where I begin to hand it off, brings us to staffing increases. And this is really to address the enrollment growth I just walked you through. And so at this time, Dr. Casimiro, Principal Donovan, they will tag team and begin to talk about this.
Thank you,
And
Kelly.
then, I'm sorry, soon to follow will be other assistant superintendents, Kelly Schuchus.
Thank you. So the next slide represents really the kind of bigger buckets of staffing across the district based on the enrollment that Mr. Ralston just presented. The first 2 lines on the left, you can see that those are really the services that are needed in terms of the increases that are required based on the enrollment. And then the last 3 lines of the slide really represent sort of the aggregate staff in core areas and electives and so on. And so you can see that our ESL bilingual needs are growing. We need a total of 8 FTEs in that category. Special ed and pupil services, an additional 8. Middle school, about 3 is what we're projecting at this time. High school, 13.5, which is really a reflection, again, of that large shift in enrollment, but also just the sheer size of the high school. And then safety advocates, an additional 5 FTEs for a total of 37.5 FTEs at $2.6 million. Next slide, please. And so we are fortunate to have Dan here tonight to talk a little bit about the high school staffing specifically, because I think it's important to understand when there is a request, how we arrive at that number, but then also what happens when we don't actually get that number. But just to, Dan, while you're making your way up to the table, for next year we have proposed 0.5 FTE for an academy administrator. So to begin our part as part of our plan for the hiring of additional staff in that area, we'll also have an additional 200 or so students and to participate in some of the training as well that will happen as a result of the academy opening. 6 FTEs in core classes, so those are certified teachers for a total of $480,000. 3 FTEs for academy, for counselors. Both are needed just in terms of enrollment, but also very important for the academy launch as well. And then 4 FTEs of elective class teachers to meet graduation requirements. And so Dan will talk a little bit about kind of how we arrive at those numbers, and then talk a little bit about some of those overages that Mr. Walston referenced earlier.
Thank you.
Hey, Principal Donovan.
How you doing? Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak. When discussing this with Mr. Spang, and looking at the numbers that I projected, it was that we needed. The question always comes up as to, where does that come from? How did you come up with that number? And I thought it would be, and asked if I could come and kind of speak and explain how I come up with these numbers, just so everyone has an idea of what goes on. The first part, there's 2 parts to this, and this is my 7th year as the principal at Danbury High School, and dating back to about my 2nd or 3rd year, and I had a meeting with Dr. Sal and Joe Martino at that time. We laid out a plan because 2 things were coming to a head that we all knew about. One was graduation requirements from the state of Connecticut. That was 21 to 25. That was 4 extra classes for students who used to graduate with 21 credits. Luckily for us, we're about 50% in that year, when I did the look at, graduated with more than 25. A lot of go-getters who decided they were going to take more classes, prepare themselves for college or work wherever they wanted to go. But the class of 21, I went back and looked at. 303 out of the 737 that graduated had 25 or more credits. That's 41%. So students were finding different ways and getting jobs and things like that, and didn't take those extra classes, which kind of helped us. But the problem with that is you have 110 students out of those 300 remainders. 110 needed 4 more classes. So for them to get 4 more classes, that's 440 seats they have to take up in a class somewhere, whatever elective they need to take, besides the English 4s and all of those things. And you do that, if you divide that and following the model, each teacher can teach 130 students, and you've got full seats for 440 of them, you come out to 3.4 teachers just for that group of 21 credits. If you do that following the kids that had 22 credits, 23 credits, and 24 credits to fill the requirement for all of those students to hit 25, you needed 9.1 teachers just on the enrollment, just on the credit attainment part alone, to satisfy the class of 21. So that number hasn't really changed that much. It's gone up a little. When I look back all the way back to 2018, it was a little bit of a different thing back then, because the high school had 3,050 kids in it in 2018. Now, fast forward now, I believe my numbers at the high school today were 3,587. We did hit 3,600 at one point, so a nice little screenshot of it. So wow, we're at 3,600. But it's gone down a little bit. There are a transient population of people coming and going and different things and transfers and stuff like that. But we've remained steady at the 3,585 type number for the rest of the time. So because of that credit to 25, we needed 9.1 teachers. We had that conversation with Sal and Joe at the time. And also what was coming down was this enrollment increase. And if you take the enrollment increases that I just mentioned, for easy math purposes, we'll talk about going from 3,000 to 3,500, 500 kids. Let's embrace the easy math if we can. Take that, each kid taking 7 classes. Why 7? We have an 8-period schedule, but not, we don't have enough staff to fill all 8, so we go with 7. Some seniors take 4. Freshmen like to take 8 to hang out as much as they can. Some take 7, and in some cases, we're having some now, because of difficulty with enrollment, the population is taking 6 classes, which means it results in 2 study halls, which we don't like students to have. So we try very hard for that. So with 7 classes as our average part, that's 3,500 seats that need to be filled. You take that number, you divide that by that 130 I mentioned, which is the teacher contracts, that's 26.9 teachers that we need when enrollment's gone up by 500. So we'll round that to 27. So now with the graduating classes of 757 going out this year and 952 coming in as 9th grade, we'll go easy math again. We'll take 200 freshmen coming in taking 7 classes is 1,400 classes they need to take, or 10.7 teachers that we need to fill those classes. That's where my numbers come from. Luckily, the 2 years after that, I did not get much of an increase. If I remember correctly, it was like a 0, a 3, and a 0 when it comes to the number of teachers. Last year, we were lucky enough, I think we attained, by the time we were done, Thompson probably around 15, 16 teachers. We absolutely needed last year, so we got that. So we took a big chunk out of that 29 that we had requested from there. So that leaves us with what we're asking for at the high school again as this comes. And that's the numbers that we know about. Superintendent Walston discussed unbudgeted numbers. Another problem we've had is between, if anybody, kids at the high school, when we start registration coming up, it's in March. So when we go through, we build our schedule off of student requests. From there, we build our schedule, see how many sections we have with the FTEs and see what we can do. We make our budget, we come, this is how many teachers you got, this is how many classes you can get. Great, we felt very comfortable with what we were running this year, and then from July 1st to September, when class started, we had a number of like 141 students show up. So if you do that, your new registers that come in at 141 times that by 7 classes, you're in the same math you were before. That leads us to another problem of something Superintendent Walston mentioned, which is overages. So now I have no more seats in art class, none whatsoever. So I have to come here and try to joke with Superintendent Walston as best I can to get him in a good mood before I go, oh, by the way, I need 3 sections of art to fill these requirements. Because of the 25, we do not have a lot of room in our schedules for a student to take 6 classes. When it was 21, it was a lot easier. You could almost graduate as a junior if you did it right. Now, with the 25, it means our seniors who are typically used to not taking the full load so they can go get jobs and earn, as seniors do that right, not to take a full schedule, that has been wiped out a little bit. So they're taking more classes and we're trying to get it through. So we go back and I say I need an art class. And it's not enough to hire a full-time teacher. I don't need love the 130 seats, but I take this role for myself, for the building and the community very serious when I'm making a budget and my asks. I don't just say, hey, Dan feels like running another art section, let's do it. There's always something behind it. So I take this very serious when we do it. But sometimes we have to come and ask for it. This year, we are running 53 overages. So there's 53 teachers who are teaching an extra class right now at Danbury High School. They are compensated for that, but it leads to another problem. It's the amount of work a teacher can do, because now they went from 130 students to about 150. And the more students you add on, the more feedback that student can get, the more attention that student gets. And as much as the teacher's compensated for it, they're tired. And unfortunately, some of them, we have to, if someone doesn't volunteer for it, we have rules that we have to go by to get someone to take that work. I hate to use the word force, but if you're the low person on the totem pole, you're the one that's taking that class. And sometimes it's, first or second year teachers that are now taking on a 6th class, where they are trying to develop their craft as new teachers as best as they were prepared coming out of some of the great programs we have around here in our secondary eds. You step into a classroom and teaching, it's a whole different ballgame. And they're trying their best to prepare themselves with 5 classes. Now you add a 6th one on there, and it becomes that much more. So if you look at the slide that's in there on page 21, that's kind of a list of our overages. Now, all of these, when we look at our overages, there's different reasons, and I don't want you to think that's all enrollment, because it's not. There's some up there that we call usuals, and these are just terms that we make up at Danbury High School. They're not in any textbook or anything like that whatsoever. Usuals means we run them every year no matter what. For example, HBSA 6th class, that is our nursing class. In order for the students to reach the number of nursing hours they need to go to the hospital, we have to pay the teacher an extra stipend to go with them so they can get the number of clinical hours they need to take the CNA test. That's been going on since well before all of us except Ms. Cooper have probably been around on this board, right, Ms. Cooper? Yep, there you go. So though we have those usual 5s, then we have another term which we call people. People are some are out on medical, some may be maternity leave and things like that. There's probably 30 of them up there that are that. Those are already somewhat budgeted for in this year's enrollment, but this leads us to another problem that we're having, which I believe everyone's having nationally, is teacher shortage. I can't find a world language teacher anywhere. We have had those postings up since the beginning of school, and we have tried to find them. It's the same thing with counselors, it's the same thing with special ed staff, math. We haven't been able to find them. You'll see the world language ones up there. The district has said, yes, go ahead, go get them, Dan. Fill these classes with it, and we can't. We can't. When you see something, that says 70-something days up there, or the other ones when the teacher left of how many days, 183, they're going to be out for the entire year, or they resigned, and we just can't fill it. And then the last category we use is what we call enrollment. Those are the ones that, because of the amount of students we've had to parcel schedules together to make core classes and elective classes available for our students. We have 12 of those, which equals another 2.2 teachers that would fill the gap for us. So in total, if you took it, the 10.7, the 2.2 that we have, and I don't know what's coming down the pike from July to whatever, but we don't build a schedule except for our ELL classes, like at ESL 1 or newcomers. We leave room in those for new students that we know coming in, because over the past 7 years, we can somewhat predict how they come. That's how I end up at 13.5. Adding on 1 counselor, because while we're getting 200 new students, not all of them are classroom teachers that we need. Our counselors at the high school, I believe, are overloaded already with numbers around 300. We were cited in NEASC for that. So those 200 students, we would need a counselor for, a school counselor, and that's why we put it there. Everybody awake? Sorry. But that's, I just wanted to come explain where we come up with our numbers. It's not a perfect science in that, because I can't tell you right now how many students are going to take this class next year, because we do run a schedule on enrollment, but I do know that those students need seats, and I need to put them in seats so they can get credit towards graduation, and that's what we're looking for. Questions?
Thank you, Dan. Yeah.
Can you repeat that whole thing then?
No. No.
So just for clarification, these overages here are not budgeted for, obviously, in the budget. And when,
About 36 of them, 41 probably are,
okay,
but we can't find teachers for them right now. But we thought it was important to show that just the overages, like how much of 50-something teachers are teaching an extra class right now.
Right.
So that's not budgeted.
yeah, okay,
Just 12 sections of those are unbudgeted for,
okay.
which comes out to like 2.6.
And then, we try to project the enrollment numbers, but when kids show up, we don't tell them to come back next year because we don't have anywhere to put them, right?
No, we can't.
Okay.
We can't do that.
So we have to address the growth.
Yep.
Okay.
They come in, we do our best to try to get them seats, and the way we've done it at the high school, and we think it's the best way to do it, is we let our seniors pick the classes when they load, as we call it, into Power School. They go first because they have graduation requirements, they have things that they need to hit before, and then our freshmen can last. And we ran into a problem. We were looking at it this year with the freshmen and the lack of classes that were open to them, because we don't want students sitting in study halls. We try to avoid that. one is okay to have, but any more than that, we don't have that.
Thank you.
Dr. Casimiro, you ready?
Oh,
Oh, you're up. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Okay. So next,
Am I out?
you're off the hot seat. We might call you back.
Okay.
So next we're going to look at our.
Sure. Okay. So the next slide talks a little bit about our ESL bilingual needs. As you saw, the increase in enrollment and our change over time. We have 8 additional FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, to satisfy Connecticut bilingual law and the provision of ESL services for our students. And so we have 1 bilingual Portuguese FTE at Pembroke, bilingual Portuguese at Broadview, bilingual Spanish at Broadview, a Heritage Spanish, which is technically not an ESL class. It's really a world language class for native Spanish speakers, and a Portuguese and Spanish full-time, basically paras. And so how these numbers are determined, really in terms of the Connecticut legal law, we have a data collection that occurs every October 1st. So who's present in the school system on October 1st of the previous year determines whether or not a school system has to provide by law bilingual services to students. And so the numbers here reflect our PSIS data collection from the previous year. The Portuguese, Spanish full-time paras, the 4.0 FTEs, those are paraprofessionals that work in our classrooms to support the teacher, but also to help with our bilingual needs. It's very difficult to find bilingual teachers, and so where we can't find those staff, we try to ensure that we have at least a paraprofessional working in the class to help support. And Kelly talked a little bit about the middle school needs.
We could go just back to the middle school slide for a moment. So you heard from Superintendent Walston earlier that our middle school enrollment has been trending pretty similarly across the last few years. But what we are noticing with our students is that there's an increased need for interventions and social emotional supports. And so what you'll see here is reflected in an additional FTE or full-time equivalent at each one of the middle schools, and the particular focus of this will be on intervention and support services to students, as well as meeting their social emotional needs. We should also note that Westside, which is driven by a lottery, is also something that we watch and monitor closely, as we're still not sure which of our 6th graders will attend. So that does impact both our special education and ESL support services, as depending on the number of students that are selected through that lottery process, one of those FTEs at Westside may need to be considered for either of those support services for students. The next slide is reflective of our special education needs. As Superintendent Walston alluded to earlier, we've grown by 70 students to date. In previous school years, we're growing about 50 or 60. So the fact that we're growing about 70 students in less than a half of a year, this is the most significant spike that I've seen in my 7 years as Director of Special Education. We are projecting about another 50 students before the end of the school year. And we have kind of 2 bubbles of students that are moving through. The first is our preschoolers. Our preschool population is exploding. We have currently 50 students that are somewhere between 2.5 and almost 3 that we need to evaluate for services between now and the start of next year. We anticipate that we will have a significant number that will need additional support. And while we'll lose some students that move on to kindergarten, this will cause us to need to add at least 1 more classroom at the preschool level. We are also seeing an increased need in some of the needs of those students, which causes more of a specialized program. For example, we have more recently needed to add a medically fragile program to our preschool program. These are students that are significantly medically compromised and require additional para support, nursing support, and so forth. So it's not just representative of the number of additional students, which we are seeing on a significant uptick, but also on the needs of the individual students within the program and how we support those. Next is K-12. Again, we're seeing growth across the district. At the elementary level, we are anticipating the need to add 2 additional programs. We are very fortunate to have one program that consists right now of 6 self-contained classes for students on the autism spectrum. And the numbers that we're anticipating out of our preschool program are going to warrant a 7th class there. These are students that need a smaller class size, typically 10 to 12 students with a special educator as well as paras to support with their learning. In addition, at the middle and high school, just due to overall student growth, very similar to what Dan was alluding to earlier, we graduate less students with special needs than we have coming in the door. So at the high school, we will need 2 additional teachers to support with staffing. And our middle school, while our enrollment has been consistent as far as the number of middle schoolers attending school, the needs of those requiring special education supports has increased, and we'll need to add another special education teacher to Broadview, as well as one more to Rogers Park due to that increased enrollment. In addition, you'll see it here reflected on the slides, physical therapy as well as speech and language therapy. The physical therapy is predominantly at the pre-K through 2 level. We're seeing an increased need in students receiving physical therapy supports, and that physical therapy is to access school safely. So this is not physical therapy that you would receive if you had an injury or something like that. This is to make sure that our students can safely access the educational environment, can be mobile, that we can train staff on how to meet students' needs. Things like toileting, moving from a wheelchair to a walker to a stander, all of those things require a highly skilled staff member to train others to ensure safety for students, as well as to provide those support services to kids. And then lastly, we're seeing a need of increased speech and language services, again, at the high school and the preschool, and so that would be one position that would be split to support the overages in both of those areas. Sorry, before I move on, I see the
That's
question.
What's the student counselor ratio at the middle school and high school?
Sure. Over 300. So you're hovering around 300 at the high school. At the middle school, you have 3 counselors for about 1,000 students. So 330 or so. And west side, you have 750 students split across 2 counselors.
So are we including any of that as far as additional counselors?
So the middle school additional staffing, if we are looking at that, that was what I was alluding to for social emotional support, between the intervention and the social emotional support at that level.
Thank you.
Okay, the next slide talks a little bit about staffing for safety advocates. We currently are planned for about 36, or exactly 36 safety advocates. And next year we'd like to add 5. That's 1 for each middle school and then 2 more at Danbury High School. This group had talked earlier about getting closer to a 300 student to 1 safety advocate ratio. Currently, that's about what we're doing at high school, but by adding 2, it gives us a little bit of flexibility. People covering people when they're sick, we can move people around and not take away from security at the high school. So 5 safety advocates and about $150,000.
Energy and utilities. I think we've had it pretty good the last few years trying to predict these things, but it's quite a challenge this year with what we all know is going on with our electricity prices and prices at home. And each of these energies you see up there really has to be looked at alone. The different things that impact these utilities. You can't apply a broad brush. So the other night we went into it pretty deeply with the finance committee. I'm just going to give you the kind of the top level things we talked about. What I said to them is we're very fortunate. We've relied pretty heavily on Chip Volpe, the town's purchasing agent. He's very good at these kind of things. He understands the market. He can tell you what's going to happen. He's what's going to happen every day in the utilities market. He's great to work with. So I worked a lot with him on what these projections would be. For example, the natural gas, which is shot way up, You'll see that we're looking for a 44% increase. That's because a year ago, we were paying 59.7 cents per 100 cubic feet. That's how it's measured, 59.7 cents. This year, we're paying 86.2 cents, and that's a 44% increase. We didn't think it was going would go any higher next year than it is now. That's a pretty big increase, but that's what we're seeing so far. Electricity, good example of what I was just saying. Chick, your electricity bill, ours, just like yours at home, really comes in two parts. There's the supply cost, and then there's the delivery cost. And for us, it's about half and half. Half of our bill is one, half's the other. And what Chick was able to do for most of our accounts is lock in the supply cost through December of 2024 at a very low price. And hats off to him. He's saving us a lot of money. The delivery cost, though, has a number of different component parts. That has been moving up. In the last 6 months, it's moved up 13%. And we think in the next 6 months will be another 13%. And remember, that's half of our cost. And we felt that that trend would continue, that trajectory for the next year as well. So we added another 13 and 13. And when, again, because it's only half, that comes out to about a 27% increase next year over where we are right now. Propane, we put propane in all our school buses, propane powered. We had cooperation with the city. Chick had locked in our propane price for an extended period of time at a very, very low rate, about $1.09. It lasted for a couple of years, but it ran out last June. And when it ran out, prices were much higher, so we're stuck. We didn't think it was the right time to lock in again all of our need. We thought the price would come down, and it has come down. We locked in a little bit for this year, but from that $1.09 price, it's now gone up to $1.62. That's quite an increase. We think that might go up even a little more. So there's an 82% increase on that one. In our bus contract, we pay for the fuel. The gasoline, that's simply the gasoline price that we pay for our buildings and grounds vans that we run around town. We thought it would be good to put a little bit more increase in there just in case, but that doesn't seem to be going up either. The heating oil, that was pretty tough. When we looked at what has happened with that, talked about it, it's been very, very volatile on the market. Thought about a 30% increase from budget to budget would make sense. But in all of these, what we decided with the finance committee the other night was we set these projections in December, and we thought we'd go back again, take a fresh look at it before we adopt a budget in February. Maybe some of you have gone down, some have changed. So a couple of days before, we're going to call Chick again, see what he thinks of what's going on. That's the plan. The other thing I should have said to start with, on all of these, we're predicting the same quantities next year as we have this year. You wouldn't change the quantities unless you thought something was off from the previous budget, or you were changing something with the building and those lines. So the same quantities, it's all about prices, and it's the same kind of thing we're seeing at home.
Okay, technology replacement. So pandemic changed a lot about learning, but probably one of the most significant things it did was it made Danbury a bona fide one-to-one school district. And the device of choice for us is Chromebooks. We are a Google district. We use Google Classroom, the Google Suite of Services. That initial thrust of Chromebooks that we bought to move into remote learning was largely bought with CARES Act money and ESSER funds. And as John's alluded to, those funds are now drying up or going to be expired very shortly. And now that we're a one-to-one district, it's something we have to maintain. The life expectancy on a Chromebook is about 5 years. That's assuming it gets treated well, it doesn't get dropped or spilled on. So the responsible way to make sure we keep every student with a good Chromebook in his hand is to start a replacement cycle, a replenishment cycle, where you do about 1/5 of the computers every year over the course of 5 years, and then that just becomes a cost that gets embedded into your budget going forward. So we're going to be starting that next year. We're planning for about 12,500 units, which gives us a few there for coverage for breakage and drops. So it's about 2,500 units a year. We'll be doing that for 5 years, and that brings us to about $875,000 a year. That's the initial cost for next year's Chromebooks. We'll see if that price goes up at all, but that's what we're planning for next year. And then the remaining $125,000 we're going to be starting to use for our printer and photocopier replenishment. We have some really old copiers in the district. I think our record holder is a 9-year-old copier at Park Ave, so these lead to delays in printing reading materials, and you can just imagine the line of teachers that just need to get their copies run off in the morning before class. So we're going to be replacing the copiers. They have a little bit longer lifespan than the Chromebooks, so that'll be a 6-year replenishment cycle, and the $125,000 will be going towards the first year of that. And then over the course of the 6 years, we have 112 copiers in the district right now. When we add them in for the Career Academy, we'll be adding in a few more, so we're planning for about 120 copiers replaced over the course of 6 years. So that's $1 million.
Equipment and services. John, are we back to you, or are we still with you?
Transportation, sure. We did a deep dive on transportation also with the Finance Committee. It's slide 33, Mike, if you want to put that up. And there really are 3 distinct component parts of that. The public school transportation, home to school, let me back up. Our contract with STA was extended last June, or June of 21, or a year and a half ago. And in hindsight, that was a very good move to make. The increases were 3.5% a year. No one really saw the inflation that then burst on the scene. The schools that today are going out to bid, their contracts are up. Contractors don't want to extend anymore, including STA with its customers. So we caught it right. And we're budgeting for the same number of school buses, school bus routes in regular education next year as we have this year. The reason, as you look at that first line, that it's up more than 3.5% is an accounting change, I'll call it. We also bus students to Avitech, and until this budget, the cost for that Avitech busing appeared in Dan's budget. In your line item budget, you'll see that was on page 34. That's now a 0 in next year's budget. We moved it over here because the bus routes in the morning, they all blend together sometimes anyway. A bus may do a Avitech, then a Broadview, then a Shelter Rock or something like that. There's no reason to separate that out. The state doesn't ask us to report it differently. It didn't make sense. So we moved it over all into one line, public school. The non-public school transportation, as I mentioned to the Finance Committee, if non-public school here in Danbury, including the parochial schools, if their enrollment is more than 50% of their students live in Connecticut. And, you know, being where we are, we may have some Westchester kids in our schools. But if 50% or more live in Connecticut, then we have to bus the Danbury kids to those schools. And we have to give them the same level of service that we give our public schools. So if, you know, a kid we make kids walk, if they live within a mile of the high school, our high school, and they don't get a bus service, we can't say, well, Immaculate, that's 3 miles. We have to apply the same criteria. So it's the same number of buses. That is something we have to report separately to the state at the end of the year, so that's a separate line, but it's going up. The one that moves around a little is special education. And there's a couple things going on next year. We expect, we think we may have a handful of new placements out of district. So we have to provide for those. You know, when you have an outplacement, you also have to provide the transportation there as well. But our contract with STA does not really cover. You see a lot of white vans out on the road carrying school children on top and things. Those are going to out-of-district schools. They're for special education. And what we do is every year we take those runs and we put them out for competitive bid. And 5 or 6 different companies that bid those and at different prices. Ed Advance, for example, and Arrest will bid some. But last spring when we bid them for this year, those providers were experiencing higher fuel prices, higher gas prices. So we saw much higher costs than we had before. We hadn't had a chance to budget for that because our budget was already done by then. So we need to reflect what we think will be the higher costs for those white vans. So we see that going up. But the rest of the service, our middays, our pre-K, all of that, we're budgeting the same number of buses, runs, kids, days. Same with summer school, just what we've had for the last couple of years. And there's a couple slides in the deck that just show you the numbers of buses in each of these categories. I won't go through these again. Went through those.
Thanks, John. So I'll back up a little bit. So we are now in this bucket.
I just have a quick question. Have we had to adjust the number of buses based on this increased enrollment that we've been seeing?
No, but they're very, very crowded if you look at them. If you talk to Dan, he's out there every afternoon and morning, they're full.
So what's the average amount of kids per school bus?
Right, so let's take a bus that goes, we'll do 3 tiers. Say it's a high school, middle school, elementary. And you'll see on the side of the bus, capacity 66. That's not high school and middle school kids. You can't put 3 on a seat. That's the capacity for elementary students. For the high school and middle school, about 50 kids will fit on the bus. And you'll see them, some may look empty because of where they're going, or they might have a short route in between 2 big ones, but those are the capacities we try and load for.
So are we looking to add buses?
We're not.
We're not.
Thanks, John. So just wanted to go back a little bit. We kind of jumped past this slide. So we are in that bucket of equipment and services that was a total of a $2 million increase. So John just talked a little bit about transportation, but this bucket includes a lot of different things: building maintenance, licenses, memberships, paper, equipment, repairs. There's a new personal hygiene mandate around feminine products. The schools are mandated to provide cleaning products, service contracts, software. So it's a whole bunch of things that go in here. I want to talk a little bit about some of the building maintenance and improvements that we're planning to do. So as our buildings continue to age, it's important that we have an updated facilities master plan. This does a sort of assessment of, the age of the roofs and floors and, doors and things like this, so that we just don't get caught short by a leaky roof. We know that it's coming up on its replacement cycle, and we have to plan accordingly for that. So that's something we definitely want to get done this year. And you'll see a theme as we go through here. A lot of these are about partitions and making new classroom space in existing spaces. That's one thing that we want to do at King Street Primary, give them a little more classroom space. KSI and KSP, some new flooring. Morris Street, they need additional classroom partitions and some new doors as well. South Street, office partitions. KSP, if you've been over there, they have that media center where there's that kind of pit, and it's just not the safest thing. So we want to fill that in and make it just a nice flat surface. We want to paint the auditorium at DHS, and then district-wide, we want to buy some new auto scrubbers. Our custodians cover a lot of square footage, and those auto scrubbers allow them to get a lot more done in a shorter amount of time. So we want to buy some new machines for them. Haystown and Great Plain, we want to add some new entrance vestibules. This is something we've talked about over the last year, and came as a recommendation from some of our school studies. DHS gym bleachers, currently they are mechanical. Some of them are electric, but some are mechanical, and now with the new floor, as I understand it, when you pull them out the mechanical way, there's a risk of it damaging the floor, so by making them electronic, they'll come out a little more smoothly and not damage the floor. And then again, Shelter Rock, room dividers for additional classroom space. So a lot of these are things that we're just doing to try to make do with the current space we have, and make sure that everybody has learning spaces and workspaces and spaces for private conversations and offices, and that's coming to about $689,000. Now, I just want to say there's an additional budget off to the side of this, which is the city's capital budget. That's more bigger projects, that's a couple $1 million. That is a separate budget. So I know we've talked about both insights and facilities, so I just want to be clear that this is a separate amount of money that is in our budget, not the capital.
Thank you, Mike. Can you fast forward to slide 37, and I will wrap up with these last few slides. And so you may recall earlier in the presentation, this is the one with the piggy bank, page 37. We're trying there. And so you might recall there was a subtotal as part of the initial ask. We went from 14.8 million to 14.8 million to 9 million. So 13.8, I believe it was, to 9 million. And this is this idea of efficiencies and cost savings. The cost savings are, frankly, because of the various vacancies that we have throughout the 22-23 school year. We don't anticipate we hope to fill them, but we do not anticipate we will be filling the vast majority of these positions. The majority of them are actually paraprofessional positions that we have district-wide. We hope we don't have to pay for that later. I'm not going to go into that detail right now, but there is an opportunity this year. And so we are planning to use the monies that we are saving from salaries this year from the vacancies to pay for the technology replacement, to prepay for some of the energy costs, projected energy costs and utilities for next year. And this is an opportunity for us to pay down on some of those other things I opened up with to open up the presentation. Additionally, we had the ESSER 2 shortfall, and those are the staff members that are in ESSER 2 that's expiring this June 30th. We will carry that forward into other grants. In this case, it will be ESSER 3. We will kind of fold it over to ESSER 3 and really, frankly, worry about that next year, which is a whole other story that I'll talk about in the subsequent slides. Mike, all right. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about unfunded mandates. The Board of Ed has heard us talk about unfunded mandates two of them, there are a number of them, by the way. There are more than two, but two I want to bring to the attention of the board and for our visitors tonight. One, it's the K-5 reading initiative, and you'll note that it was not part of our budget this evening, because we are looking to use grant monies to pay for it, but indirectly, it still impacts the budget, because we have between $4 and $5 million that we could be paying for something else. Instead, and by the way, this is the right work. Like, the district is fully on board and believes in the science of reading and using this type of reading program in the district. But it's a mandate that's unfunded. And so we will cobble together grant monies to pay for the full $4 to $5 million grant, and we estimated at $4.5 million. This includes not only programming, but the professional development, et cetera, to launch the program. The next one is circling back to the presentation that you heard from Principal Donovan, and that's the 25 credits. And so we moved, and are we in year 3 or year 4, Dan, of that mandate? I don't remember.
This is like the first graduating class.
Okay. And so, okay, got it. And so previously we were at 21 credits, which requires this many classes for a student, and for the system, to 25 credits, and then all of a sudden it's this many classes we need for the system. That comes at a cost for us. We estimated that's at about $1.2 million cost, maybe a little more, a little less, but it's more teachers because there are more classes that have to be offered. And then this is not a one-time cost for the district. This is a cost for the district every year on top of every year. And so even though, well, enrollment is increasing, but it's enrollment times the unfunded mandate of going from 21 to 24 credits, that's really impacting our reality. And so on the next slide, you'll see it says long-term effects of COVID. And this is just really thinking about some of the challenges that we have been faced with post-pandemic. And I know we're kind of still pandemic, but really I'd like to think we're post-pandemic, but we're feeling the impact. And so for anyone who will listen, I will talk about our challenges around chronic absenteeism. I know I had a conversation with the board just a couple of weeks ago, had a conversation in our initial launch of our collective impact meeting. And chronic absenteeism essentially means typically we have 180 days in the school year. If any of our students are absent 10% of the time, or 18 days, they are considered chronically absent. You could be chronically absent because of an excused day. You could be chronically absent for an unexcused day. You could be chronically absent because of a suspension. You could be chronically absent if you are missing instruction more than 10% at any point in the school year. So if you've only had 50 days and you've already been 5 days out, you're chronically absent according to that metric. And we now have, in this district, and I'm proud to say this and be part of it, we had single-digit chronic absenteeism, well below the state average, 7-8%. If our kids are here, we can teach them. Our staff does the magic that they always do. We are closer to 23 and 24% chronic absenteeism right now. Now, it made sense last year because particularly here in Danbury, our COVID cases were higher than really the entire state of Connecticut, and we were encouraging staff to stay home if they were sick, encouraging kids to stay home if they were sick, encouraging parents to keep their kids home if they even smelled like sick. Like, everyone was just encouraged to stay home. And so our chronic absenteeism numbers just went out of the roof. Well, this year, we're still finding it, and by the way, I was sick going into the break. A lot of staff was sick going into the break. A lot of kids were sick going into the break. And so whatever the impact, whatever the decision-making is at home, we're finding that we have elementary students staying at home at a record rate, middle school students staying home at a record rate. Chronic absenteeism numbers at the high school level is normal because adolescents don't always make the best choices, and so they may cut class, which may contribute to chronic absenteeism. But K-5 and 6-8, they don't make those decisions historically, and those numbers are well beyond anything we have ever seen. So when I talk about the long-term effects of COVID, it's in Kelly earlier talking about social emotional support for students. The challenges are different post-pandemic. Our board knows that we've had expulsions at a rate that we have not experienced here in this district before. Those numbers did not exist prior to the pandemic. Those numbers exist now. It's part of our reality post-pandemic. Suspension rates are higher post-pandemic, and the support needs for kids it's also true, and that's why you continue to hear this kind of song from us and our staff throughout the district. Next page, Mike, and there's only two more, the ESSER Lifeboat. And so it really has, and so nationally, you read articles on really kind of how the ESSER funds and the release monies have been used. And what we have found across the country, particularly in urban school districts, is really it's allowed districts to catch up. It really has. And the same is also true for us here in Danbury. We are in a position where our lifeboat, at least for ESSER 2, is expiring soon. We're fortunate that ESSER 3 and some of the commitments we had initially made, we will be able to get creative and move some of our ESSER 2 staff over to ESSER 3. But when we're talking about staff, we're talking over 100 staff members between the two grants. And one, yes, we will be faced with some tough decisions, but a lot of those teachers are at Danbury High School. That's how we hired them. That's why it was so easy for us to say, sure, Dan, we will get you those teachers. And some of the board members might recall, we were able to use ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. They were eligible for that grant because of social distancing, because of the pandemic. Last year, we folded 8 to 9 teachers, elementary teachers, through attrition, and so we cut those positions because we no longer needed them. But post-pandemic, we still needed the positions that we brought on during the pandemic at the high school. So that's kind of our reality now in that regard. And I just want to talk about next steps for us here as a community. There are several next steps for us as a community. But I just want to touch on, because I had an opportunity to be part of a cause meeting this week. I know we have between legislators and our councilmen, councilwomen, of course our mayor and our Board of Education. We are, and I'm happy to say I'm partnered with the mayor's office on this, to get behind a bill to fully fund Danbury Public Schools and other districts across the state. The ECS formula right now does not acknowledge or weigh differently the needs of our community. I think we've talked about this several times in presentations, but we didn't really underscore it here tonight. When talking about our multi-language learners or our ELL learners, we have the second highest number in the state of Connecticut, without any acknowledgement financially for that number. And when I say the second highest, I'm saying we have more ELL students than the Bridgeports, the New Havens, the Waterbury. There's only one other district in the state of Connecticut that has more than us. Yet we also have the highest percentage of ELL students in the state of Connecticut by far. The ECS formula does not acknowledge that. And it's not weighed in the way to give us extra money to help support the special staffing that we need. And so in this partnership with the mayor's office, we're hoping to, again, advocate, as we did last year, advocate for a bill to accelerate that funding. But I think we need the entire city of Danbury to get behind in support of accelerating this funding. So there's more to come. And I think in the next, we've been talking with Ryan Bingham, who's our lobbyist, so we have a meeting with him next week. And Mike and I will provide an update to the board on Wednesday. It's a little early yet, but we just want to give some initial updates to the board around kind of, I think it's like over 1,500 bills that came through. I'm assuming those things will begin to be sorted out soon, and hopefully we can find ourselves in there and get some support across the state for a change in the ECS formula. And for us, it really means alliance. So I just wanted to end on that note. I know that there are probably a lot of questions. Our presentation went a little bit longer than I expected. course, I didn't help because I'm talking as well. But I want to make sure the board has an opportunity for questions. Also, I know we have some folks from our council and the mayor's office here as well. Chairperson,
So yes, first I'd like to open it up to our board members, any questions, and then to Mayor Esposito if he wants a question, and then the education committee council members if they'd like to ask some questions. So we'll stick with the board, start with the board members first. That was easy.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Russo, okay.
Just to start off, thank you, Mr. Olson, the gentleman, for an excellent presentation. We certainly appreciate all your work. On the technology, replacing the Chromebooks for $12,000. Are we handing out Chromebooks to K-1, K and first grade students also? I noticed that we're looking at over 12,000 units to replace.
the answer is yes, but Dr. Casimiro, can you talk about the why behind that?
Sure. So during the pandemic, it was critical, as you remember, for all of our students to have access to technology. So initially, we wanted to make sure that everybody had the new Chromebooks, and especially our K-1s needed a little bit of a different type of touchscreen Chromebook for easier navigation. We are having some conversations now, though, moving forward about whether or not those students actually need to take them home on a regular basis. And screen time for our youngest learners. So while we have that, I think as part of the account now, we are going to be monitoring really how much we think students will need to have the one-on-one versus having a laptop cart, between one or two classrooms. So we're having some of those conversations now, but I believe the initial number that's up there was for the true one-to-one, which included our kindergartners. So it should, when we get to the point where those laptops need to be replaced, then we'll be making some decisions at that point.
Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Casimiro. Also, a question on safety and security. I noticed we're adding some safety advocates. Would we consider additional school resource officers instead?
Did you say instead?
Instead.
So, well, yes, the answer is yes, we would consider it. The 3 for each middle school was really a follow-up to the request the board made last year of trying to get 3 at every middle school, and of course continue advocates to help support the increased enrollment at the high school. And I believe we also had a question about maybe having a discussion, do we need more at the elementary school? And then we kind of ended there. And we opened up the school year with 2 at every middle school, mostly because 1, we hadn't budgeted the 3 for every school. Like when we talked about it, I think it was at the end of the school year. And it was kind of all budget cycle. So we got 3 more advocates in. But Mr. Russo, I guess what I'm trying to say is the advocates are reflecting kind of the conversations we had here. If there's an appetite for a different model, I think it really just, we need to talk about it here as a board and see if it's something that we can afford.
Quite well taken, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Cooper.
Just a quick question. As we go back and we talk about the safety advocates that we are projecting to put in place, these are only, it depends on the budget whether we add them.
Yes, Ms. Cooper.
Right, so, it's a projected number that we want in place. It has not finally been finalized that we're going to have them in place. Am I right about that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And the cost that it's going to cost us as a board to place them. I personally would like to thank everyone for the presentation. I think it was done beautifully. I know we on strict time frame at times, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer to understand this budget. And this is a budget that I've sit on this board all these years that have really as I've gone over the years, trying to understand it more and more and more. And I've always came to the conclusion that we support the budget because it's the right thing to do for our students and our administrators and our teachers and everyone that's in place to teach our children. And I would like to say to Mr. Donovan, who has opened up and let some of us see what goes on up at Danbury High School. Because it's not a one-shot deal, you go in, you bring in a teacher, you do this. There's other things that's involved with students, working with students, and the parents to make sure that a child can get through the educational process. And sometimes it's not easy. So I would like to say to Mr. Donovan, and I know he's always joking with me because, you know, him and I have been playing this little tag with this knee replacement for the last a year and a half. But I would say to him, you have did an excellent job in bringing the educational expectation that students should have to get out of Danbury High School. And it's not a place that some students just want to go and get out. It takes the parents, it takes the student to want to do what they need to do to graduate and move forward. And I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from board members? No? So I'll open it. How are we on time? We want a hard out at 8:30? What time is it now? I will leave at 8:26 then, it's 8:25. So I'll open if Mr. Mayor has a question or anything.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to echo those that state speaker, Dan Donovan does an excellent job. Thank you. I'll sit down for this.
Less than one. I just wanted to congratulate Dan on the efforts that he put forth for our high school. We all know that that's the largest school in the state. Population-wise, we all know that we're working on resolving that population or overcrowding situation. But I really wanted to thank each and every one of you here tonight. Of course, the staff is doing such a great job, and they put forth the best they can year after year. Kevin, I just want to congratulate you for your success as the superintendent of this city. You took over from the second spot, and I appreciate all your efforts. So I think what I'd like to emphasize is that I've always done this from day one, is we need to work together. I see what you're offering here tonight. You've done your job, your due diligence on the numbers. We bring all the information together. We know where we're lacking. We know what we need for the future. And I think I made it clear that education is a priority of my administration. And we're going to work together with the council to bring forth the best possible solutions we can working together. And I just want to thank you all very much for your effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for joining us.
So any council members on the education committee like to come on up? No. Any invited council members? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We're going to keep it to 3 minutes, Mr. Stanley.
Let's try. Well, then, I've got many questions, and I know that I can ask them during our budget process on the city council side. But I'll stick to just one core base here. This presentation, I've been part of this on both sides, on city council and here, and this is one of the best that I've seen that really broke out the differences and the need in the district. We've got a lot of concerns, and I know that you do too. What I don't see in here is any kind of projected budget or beginning of a budget for the costs that you're going to incur with the Career Academy. There wasn't any in last year's budget either, and we can go back to those discussions that we had then too. Is that a safe argument to say that there's nothing in here that's really preparing for the growth that you're going to have when the Career Academy does it?
Yes, Mr. Santos, it is not in here. I will say, however, through our task force committee meetings, we have kind of outlined the projected growth and the costs associated with that growth at those meetings. We have not had it as part of this packet, but we could put it as an appendix to our budget books.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand where you're coming from. This cost here is just basically what Joe Martino used to say, turn on the lights and pay the bills, right? There's no frills to this, we're not doing anything additional to it. Finally, a last question. If you don't get this asked, what are you looking at as a potential downside of that? What are you going to cut?
I don't know, because I don't know what our final number will be. You know, we're fortunate, or I'm just going to say we're fortunate. You know, the relief monies have, they come at an amazing time, and the relief monies came, and so, you know, the easiest one to talk about is we had a 3-year dedicated plan when we were accepted for, the grants were not all automatic. I'm talking about the ESSER relief monies. And so the one that everyone in the community knows about is Brookfield. And so that was a 3-year plan. And because it ended up only being 1 year, there are savings associated with that. And so with that savings, and so let's just say hypothetically that was $500,000 between staffing and rentals and buses, et cetera. We could probably slide 3 or 4 people in there for 1 year. Because the last thing we want to do is lose services right now. Now, as it is, the folks who are in ESSER 2, because that was not part of our ask, ESSER 2 folks, the staff who was in ESSER 2 was not in our ask, because we just recognize it shouldn't be in the ask. But the day is coming for us, and we're trying to get as close to the acceleration when we finally get that bump in ESSER money. I'm sorry, not ESSER, in Alliance funding monies. And we're hoping that bump in Alliance, that revenue stream from Alliance, when we get that increase, so the closer we get that, we're hoping to offset some of those staff that are in these other grants right now. This is my long way of saying, Farley, I don't want this district to be in a position where we are cutting a whole bunch of programming for our kids and our families. If we were never in a position to be able to do it, we really can't now. And so I'm hoping we don't have to have that day. I was pressed last year to answer this question. This is how we answered it last year, we ended talking about some of the things that we are not required, services we are not required to provide. So of course, we would have to look at every level, from district office to buildings to classrooms. We don't want to touch the classrooms, right? But services and interventions and compliance, we can't move. And so, but full day kindergarten, we can, right? And so we're not required to provide full day kindergarten. We're not required to provide athletics for kids. We're not required to, right? And so we're not required to provide every elective possible for kids at Danbury High School. We could say these are the classes you get, there's no such thing as electives again, and you get offered 25 credits, and then that's it, right? And then I just want to turn my phone off.
Right, well, there's a broader conversation like that with our community.
Right. And so yes, there would be impact. I don't want to send you or any of our other council members or the mayor thinking, oh my God, if we don't, because I don't want my staff to think they're going to lose their job tomorrow. And I don't want my parents to think they're not going to get services because of it. But if faced with that question, we will be ready.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Well, I was gonna have to cut Farley off. Any other invited council member? Mr. Britt?
Okay, well, I figured I would have to come up and ask some questions, considering, Farley asked something. So the two former DOE members have to ask a question, and hopefully my colleagues are saving theirs for the ad hocs. So first of all, it's really nice to see all of you on this side of the table. It's a little weird, but it's cool nonetheless. But thank you again for that presentation and for the invitation this evening, Mr. Chairman and Superintendent Walston. I just wanted to kind of follow up on a question that Farley had asked about that task force and the projections kind of for the funding of the future of the district. Was there a number that came out of that task force specifically?
We're looking for it right now.
Okay.
And I believe the middle school number was 4 to 5 million, Dr. Casimiro, does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Ironically enough, while she's looking for it, and so there are really no cost savings for starting the new middle school because we need everything from a new secretary, principal, teachers, custodian, advocates, everything, for about 365 students, by the way. For the high school, we do have an opportunity to, you found it?
Mm-hmm.
We do have an opportunity to, and Dan and Kara have done some of this work, so I'll let you just jump in.
Sure. So, if we were to open the high school, like today, we projected that it would be maybe about 55 total staff members needed at the 9-12 level, just shy of $5 million. And then the middle school component of the project is a 6-8 piece, and those are all net new staff, and that was about 59 new staff there, and that was almost $5.5 million. It's like $5.4 million. Transportation ballparked around a little over $2 million, so around $12.5 million just to really open the doors.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily account for the growing enrollment over time as well, so that would to be factored in.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that. And I guess my last question, I'll keep it short. With regard to the cost efficiencies slide, I think it was like 4.8 million. I guess just my big picture question, like what's the future implications for those cost efficiencies? Is that something that is sustainable long term? Is it sort of kind of a kicking the can down the road that we have those savings now, we're going to use them now, but they may not be there in the future? How is that going to work kind of?
This is not going to sound right the way I open, but I hope not, because the majority of our efficiencies are found in unfilled positions this year.
Okay.
And so that's really how we're able to pay down on the technology replenishment, how we're able to pay down on the fuel and energy costs for this year. To your question, Mr. Britton, this is not a sustainable strategy because, again, we're anticipating we'll be able to fill our positions.
Right.
The ESSER 2 question is, well, that's just a bigger animal because we have so many staff tied up in that grant. It's really next year we'll have to come back and talk about what this means for us in the district.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'll just leave on just one last note, kind of, in response to Mr. Donovan's, Principal Donovan's presentation. Just an anecdote for the room, those of you that didn't know, is after I passed the bar exam and I was applying to law firm jobs, I was actually substitute teaching this fall at the high school every day. So I was kind of the inside man, so I got to see everything. And trust me when I say I saw everything. And, in Mr. Donovan's presentation tonight, there was a lot that I think sounded like it was framed very positively because Mr. Donovan's the man and he's great at that, and he's a fantastic principal. But I can tell you personally, having witnessed and having experienced that high school, that it is at a breaking point. I mean, it is serious. And I know there are board members here that get that. I know there are board members that don't. I know the cabinet gets it. There are people here that get it, and there are people that do not. So my plea to all of you as a colleague, as a fellow elected official here, is to take this year seriously. Now, we are at a point of no return in this district. Take this budget seriously. My colleagues here in the council, take this budget seriously. These are our kids. This is the future of our city. So take it seriously. So thank you again for the time and for the invitation this evening, and thank you all for your service.
Thank you. We have time for one more question if any other council member wants to come on up. Mr. General.
I'll be very brief. I don't really actually have a question, more so than maybe just a couple comments. First of all, thank you all for the presentations. They were excellent. I've been part of many budget cycles and presentations and ad hoc committees, and the level of detail and how it was presented and how everybody's part of each aspect of it is really nice to see. I'm not going to duplicate too much of what anybody said, but there's a couple things. One, we do look at the historical side of things, and you presented some of those, as well as the next couple of years, which I like to see kind of where we were a few years ago, where we're going, and how this fits in. We kind of use some of that data. One of the realities of budgeting is surpluses or lack thereof, and it's not uncommon to see surpluses with budgets because you're doing the best you can in figuring out what you're going to need. I know the last few years there have been surpluses. Those things are returned to the city, but we put them aside to give back in supplement budgets and whatnot. So maybe the presentation or a presentation of some of the historical side of the surpluses that have been part of the budget, and then what the projected perhaps surpluses are, just to have an idea of what those moving parts are. Because we move those monies around once a year, but if we have an idea of what they are, we can plan accordingly. And the other item, Principal Donovan did a great job, and I know you're very well respected. I don't know you too well personally, but the side about the staff, and there was 37 or so off the top of my head, I think that were part of this. I think realistically, you're not always able to hire those, even if you wanted to hire those teachers. There's a market, and what can you bring in, what can you intake and onboard. So sometimes maybe perhaps they're fully budgeted for, of course, but the realistic expectation is that everybody's not going to be there from day one, use all of that money for that. So it'd be nice to see maybe projections or milestones at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, where staffing will be, and that probably would be a component of that surplusing and the forecasting. So maybe that's a little more integrated in talking through it. But some of those kind of things may be a little helpful for some of us to look at historically and projecting wise. Now there could be no surplus projected, but at least there's an idea of what's happening going forward on a normal basis. But again, thank you for indulging me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just final words, I just want to say thank you for everyone. I know, and to many point, and the council members, we're about working together. And I think over the years, we've had a good relationship with, City Hall and the council, and we want to continue on with that. So I want to thank everyone this weather tonight. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. You guys did a great presentation, some really good questions, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.